The broken team that shocked the NBA. It is June 25th, 1999. Patrick Ewing is sitting on a team bus somewhere alone, trying not to be seen. He's left his Achilles in a cast. His team just lost Game 5 of the NBA Finals and he's crying. Not in front of his teammates, not on camera, just a 36-year-old man, 15 years into a career in New York that gave him everything except the one ring that matters the most, breaking down in the dark. I actually broke down. I didn't want anybody to see me, so I went on the team bus. I broke down because I wasn't able to play in it, and we were losing. That moment, Patrick Ewing, alone on a bus in tears, is the story of the 1999 Knicks. Not the winning, the what could have been. But to understand what that bus ride meant, you first have to understand what it took just to reach it. Before we get into what this team actually did, you need to understand what they were up against. A ruined season, a locker room full of question marks, and a city that wasn't sure whether to believe in them. This is the story nobody tells correctly. The 1998-99 NBA season almost didn't happen at all. On July 1st, 1998, the NBA owners locked out the players. For 204 days, the season hung in the balance as labor negotiations collapsed, dragged on, and threatened to erase the year entirely. In the early hours of January 6, 1999, a deal was finally struck. The league had saved its season, but barely. What followed was unlike anything professional basketball had ever seen. Free agent signings and a 12-day training camp beginning simultaneously. Opening night on the February 5th, 50 games crammed into 90 nights. Back-to-backs were the norm. 3 games and 3 nights were common. Terry Porter. You know how guys say the season is a marathon? This was a sprint in a marathon suit. And nobody entered that sprint more fractured than the New York Knicks. The summer before the lockout had already changed everything. 2 men defined the toughness and identity of the 90s Knicks basketball gone. Charles Oakley, the enforcer, the muscle, the man players across the league, not to disrespect, traded to Toronto for Marcus Camby. John Starks, the scrapper, the Garden's heartbeat, the man who once posterized Horace Grant with Michael Jordan helpless in the background, one of the most iconic dunks in Garden history, traded to Golden State for a player who, at that moment, was the most hated man in basketball. His name was Latrell Sprewell. On December 1st, 1997, 14 months before Sprewell put on a Knicks uniform, he did something that changed his life forever. During practice in Oakland, Warriors coach PJ Carlesimo told Sprewell to put a little mustard on a pass. It was the kind of abrasive comment Carlesimo had made 100 times before. His aggressive style had worn thin with everyone, but on this particular afternoon, Sprewell was done. He warned his coach to keep his distance. Carlesimo approached anyway. What happened next shocked the entire sports world. Sprewell grabbed Carlesimo around the throat and began choking him. Players and team officials tearing him away. After 10 to 15 seconds, told to leave practice, Sprewell returned about 15 or 20 minutes later and threw a punch. The NBA handed him the longest suspension in league history at that time, a full year, 82 games. After arbitration reduced it to 68 games, Sprewell had still lost $6.4 million in salary and his Converse endorsement deal. Commissioner David Stern publicly called him a symbol of the widening gulf between professional athletes and the fans. Every sports pundit in America declared his career effectively over, and then Sprewell went on 60 Minutes and said this: "I wasn't choking PJ that hard. I mean, he could breathe. Make of that what you will, but more interesting question, the one the media never bothered to ask, was this: what does it tell you about a city when the man everyone condemned becomes the one that city completely, unconditionally embraces?" Because New York did exactly that. The moment Latrell Sprewell walked through that tunnel at Madison Square Garden, New York didn't see a villain. They saw one of their own. A man who had been knocked down, publicly humiliated, written off by every commentator in the country, and came back anyway. And Patrick Ewing had been waiting 15 years for a ring. He arrived in New York in 1985, the first overall pick, the Georgetown Giant, the man chosen to save a franchise that hadn't smelled finals basketball since the early 1970s. He rebuilt the Knicks from nothing into a perennial contender, the kind of generational center who makes a city believe again. But New York had a complicated relationship with Patrick Ewing. When he played well, they adored him. When he missed a big shot in a big moment, and there were some of those, they booed. He had heard the groans at the Garden so often that when Gundy once stood at a post-game podium and snapped at his own fans. He is a Hall of Fame player, he is getting the ball in the right spot, and he is hearing groans. He came closest in 1994, made the finals against Hakeem Olajuwon and Houston, lost in 7 games, came close again in 95, in 96, in 97, every year another exit, another offseason of questions about whether it was finally time to move on. By 1999, Ewing was 36 years old. His body had been held together by willpower and surgical tape for years, playing through tendinitis, bone spurs, wrist injuries. The lockout had at least given him a rest, but it had also cost him preparation time he couldn't afford to lose. This was his last real chance. He knew it. His teammates knew it. The city knew it. The question was whether his body would hold long enough to let him reach it. And then there was the coach. Jeff Van Gundy was not, by any conventional measure, what you'd picture when you imagine an NBA head coach, 5'9" on a good day, dressed like a man who found his suits at a lost and found. A coaching biography that consisted of 7 years as a Knicks assistant before essentially inheriting the job in 1996, no grand pedigree, no championship, no aura. What he had was something rarer, absolute loyalty to his players and stubbornness that bordered on the pathological. The most infamous image of Jeff Van Gundy isn't a championship celebration. It is a photograph from the 1998 playoffs during a brawl between the Knicks and the Miami Heat. Alonzo Mourning and Larry Johnson had come to blows. When Gundy sprinted onto the court to break it up, Mourning didn't even notice him at first. And then he did, because there was a 165-pound head coach wrapped around his leg like a barnacle. Alonzo Mourning. At that time, he felt like a piece of gum on my shoe. I was trying to shake him off. He was wrapped around and holding on for dear life. When Gundy watched the footage later and admitted he felt like, quote, an absolute fool. I know how criminals plead temporary insanity. That was Jeff Gundy, reckless, loyal, unglamorous, and completely committed to his team. In 1999, the Knicks would need all of that, and then some. The 1998-99 Knicks were not, to put it gently, a finished product. The lockout had wiped out the training camp. The compressed schedule left no room for rhythm or cohesion. Sprewell was integrating into a new city, new system, new locker room built around veterans who had loved Oakley and Starks. The roster had real talent. Sprewell, Houston, Ewing, Larry Johnson, Charlie Ward, Marcus Camby, but talent without chemistry is just a collection of good players going in different directions. They finished with 27 wins and 23 losses, 8th place in the Eastern Conference, 1 game better than the Charlotte Hornets, who were sitting at 26 and 24 and watching from the home. 1 game. That is the margin between history and nothing. The bracket was set and it could not have been more hostile. The New York Knicks, the 8th seed, would open the playoffs against the Miami Heat, the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, coached by Pat Riley, the man who had left the Knicks to take the Miami job 4 years earlier, the man this fanbase considered traitor, the man who had built his entire program to be physical, grinding antidote to everything New York represented. 5 games. That is all it took to answer the question everyone was asking. The 1999 first-round series between the Knicks and the Heat was everything those two franchises had always been to each other. Brutal, physical, relentless, decided by a point or two in the games that mattered, Alonzo Mourning had just won Defensive Player of the Year. Tim Hardaway was running the offense with the deadliest crossover in the league. The Heat and home court momentum and a roster built specifically to end New York's season, none of it was enough. The series went to a winner-take-all Game 5 in Miami. With 4.5 seconds left on the clock, the Knicks were down 1, 77-76. Allen Houston, who had struggled all night, shooting 5 of 13, caught an inbound pass. Near the top of the key, he ducked under a defender, he drove toward the lane, he released a one-handed floater, it hit the front of the rim, it bounced off the backboard, and then it dropped through. 78-77, Knicks, 0.8 seconds remaining, Miami Arena going silent. Gus Johnson's call would echo through decades of basketball history. Houston himself wrote about in a Players Tribune piece in 2020, 2 decades after the fact. Gus Johnson's call of my last second shot against the Heat in the 1999 playoffs will forever be imprinted in my mind. The most famous shot in Knicks playoffs history, a lucky bounce that broke Pat Riley's dynasty, only the second 8th seed in NBA history to eliminate a number 1 seed. 5 years after Dikembe Mutombo's Denver Nuggets made it possible, but the Knicks weren't done. The Atlanta Hawks fell in 4 games, a sweep, the second round matchup that barely registered in the city's consciousness because New York already knew where this was heading, the Eastern Conference Finals against Indiana. The Indiana Pacers had been Knicks' tormentor for years. Reggie Miller, Larry Bird on the bench, the franchise that pushed New York to the brink in back-to-back playoff seasons. Now they had the second seed and home court advantage. Miller, Jalen Rose, Mark Jackson, the Davis brothers, and battle-tested squad that taken Michael Jordan's Bulls to the absolute limit the season before. Game 1, Knicks win 93-90, Ewing with 16 points and 10 rebounds, 4 critical free throws in the closing minute, quieting the building and silencing Reggie Miller's legs, keeping him away from his favorite corner of the three-point line. Van Gundy is watching from the sideline with the expression of a man who expected nothing less. And then came Game 2 in Indianapolis. Patrick Ewing had told team Dr. Norman Scott before the game that he felt a ripping sensation in warm-ups. He played anyway. He always played. 25 minutes, 10 points, limping visibly through every possession, trying to give his team what they needed on a body that had been asked to give too much for too many years. The Knicks lost 88-86. Ewing missed a potential tying shot at the buzzer. And then the MRI confirmed what everyone feared, a partially torn Achilles, 6 weeks in a cast. His postseason was over. 15 years in New York, 1 finals appearance, lost to Houston in '94, and now a partially torn tendon in a Game 2 that nobody would have predicted would be his last. Patrick Ewing, it is frustrating to work so hard and be so close to something I've dreamed about so many years. To not be able to be on the floor to help my teammates is very frustrating and disappointing. But if my Achilles ruptures completely, it would end my career. Jeff Van Gundy, after all that he has been through this year, playing injured, doing what he could to help his team compete for a championship, I feel very bad for him. Game 3 in New York, no Ewing, and then halfway through the second quarter, no Ewing, Chris Dudley at center, a man who had played 10 total minutes in this entire postseason. The Pacers led by 5 with 3 minutes left. The Knicks season was hanging by a thread. What happened next is still the last great moment in Knicks history. With 11.9 seconds remaining, Indiana leading 91-88. The play was drawn up for Allen Houston. The ball was supposed to go to Houston, but Houston was covered. The outlet, the backup option, standing at the arc as a safety valve was Larry Johnson. Johnson got the ball. He took one dribble left. Antonio Davis was flying at him. He launched a three-pointer. The whistle blew before it went through. Antonio Davis had fouled him. The shot dropped, 3 points plus 1 free throw. 92-91, Knicks, Madison Square Garden becoming the loudest building on earth. Larry Johnson. The ball wasn't even supposed to go to me. It was supposed to go to Allen Houston, and I was supposed to be the outlet. And once I got it, I didn't even look at the clock. Once I got it, I just went. Johnson later said it was the greatest play he'd ever made in basketball, better than winning a national championship in college, better than being drafted first overall. One play, one moment. The Knicks won Game 3, they won the series 4-2 without their franchise center, without their backup center, the first 8 seed in NBA history to reach the finals. The San Antonio Spurs were waiting, and the Spurs were everything the Knicks were not in that moment. Rested, healthy, deep, they had posted the best record in the Western Conference with 37 wins in 50 games. And they were built around two of the most dominant interior players the league had ever seen playing together at the same time. David Robinson, one of the greatest centers in the history of the game, Navy graduate, MVP, Olympic gold medalist, in the final act of a Hall of Fame career, and a 23-year-old second-year forward named Tim Duncan, who was just beginning to show the world exactly how terrifying he was going to be for the next 2 decades. The Twin Towers, the most dominant interior presence in basketball had seen in years, now facing a New York Knicks team with a no-healthy center, and a limping Larry Johnson, and a city running on pure adrenaline and borrowed time. The series lasted 5 games. Duncan was otherworldly, 27.4 points, 14 rebounds, 2.2 blocks per game. Robinson posted 16.6 points and 11.8 rebounds alongside him. In Game 2, San Antonio held the Knicks to 67 total points. 67. Without Patrick Ewing, without the one big man who could have made it a contest in the paint, who had faced Duncan in practice, who knew how to make life difficult for a dominant center, the Knicks were outmatched at the position that decided the series. The Spurs closed it out in Game 5, San Antonio's first championship. Somewhere on that sideline through every game, in a gray suit with his ankle wrapped, Patrick Ewing was watching Tim Duncan do things to his teammates that he believed he could have stopped, watching the series slip away, possession by possession. When the final buzzer sounded, he didn't stay. He found the bus. Years later, he would add one more line to that bus story. It definitely would have been tougher series for them. Marcus and myself would have been a formidable duo to go against, both Tim Duncan and David Robinson. Here's what history remembers. The 1999 Knicks lost the NBA Finals in 5 games. 8 seed, couldn't handle the Spurs the end. Here's what history forgets. They beat the number 1 seed in the first round, only the second 8 seed in NBA history to ever do it. They swept the second round, then they beat the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference Finals without their franchise center, the 1 seed, the 4th seed, the 2 seed, all eliminated by a team that 1 foot in the lottery 2 months earlier. And the man who choked his coach 18 months before, Latrell Sprewell, the Pariah, the cautionary tale, the symbol of everything wrong with professional sports, became face of the New York's most electric run in decades. Jeff Van Gundy had taken a roster of cast-offs, newcomers, and aging veterans to the most improbable finals appearance this league had ever seen. And Patrick Ewing gave 15 years of his life to a city, watched his last real chance shredded by a torn tendon in the worst possible game, and spent the most important nights of his basketball career sitting in a gray suit on the bench. He deserved better. The 1999 Knicks deserved better. They never got the ending they deserved, but the ending they got, it is the kind you remember forever. The 1999 Knicks didn't get their ring, but they gave this city something rarer, a postseason nobody saw coming, built by people nobody believed in. That is not a footnote, a legacy. Thanks for watching.